So a little bit about my webinars. I tend to cover all abilities and knowledge levels. I've got over 50 titles, so you may see a little bit of repetition in some of the slides this evening. I may use them to make the same points, or perhaps a different one with the same slide. So please don't think I've seen this before and switch off. A little bit about my beekeeping so you know where I'm coming from and who you're dealing with. I started keeping bees in 1963. For around about 15 years, I had 130 colonies. But now I'm down to about 20 or 25 of my own, 26 at last count. I'm the teaching apiary manager of my local association in Whisper Green, BKA in West Sussex, where we've always got between 30 and 50 colonies for teaching. I deal with that lot, plus I go out to see members, plus various visits and demonstrations and that I do elsewhere. So I actually see a lot of bees. I'm not just somebody who's coming to beekeeping and got a couple of colonies and then telling the world about it. I do a lot of teaching. In fact, somebody's worked out that until the end of May, I should be doing over 70 webinars. I didn't work it out, somebody else did. I do quite a lot of demonstration, going to other places, other beekeeping associations, plus what I do at Whisper Green. And I do quite a bit of writing either for websites or books or magazines or whatever. I am not really a technical beekeeper, scientific beekeeper. I'm a practical beekeeper, and I tend to do things with my hands based on what my eyes and my ears tell me is happening in the colony. I can do that because I use quite a bit of observation, lateral thinking and logic as well. But over the years, I've seen and handled a huge number of colonies in various situations. I've traveled widely throughout British Islands and Ireland, also the United States, a bit on the continent as well. So I've actually seen a lot of different bees kept by a lot of different beekeepers in different conditions as well. And I consider it's a really privileged position to be in because not many people actually do it. As a result of that, I hope I understand what you folk want wherever you come from. It's going to be difficult, but I'm going to try and satisfy everybody. So there should be something in here for all of you. But one thing that's concerned me over the years is the sort of one-size-fits-all mentality of beekeeping, because things sometimes even 10, 15, 20 miles away, conditions can be very, very different. And you can go perhaps up in the hills somewhere. In fact, I know somebody in Cheshire who's got bees in both the Cheshire Plain and also Saddleworth Moor, only 20 miles away. Saddleworth Moor is very, very marginal for bees, yet the very same bees do well, only 20 miles away. So beekeeping isn't just a case of beekeeping by numbers.
Roger, sorry, we've lost your face. Some people won't be bothered by that, but some people are saying, where are you?
Not sure. Oh, what's that? That's twice this has gone out, Richard. Just gone again.
Yeah, we've got you back.
I hope that's okay. Yeah. Is that all right?
We've got your face, but no PowerPoint now.
Right. Okay. I'm coming back. Right. So, whoops. Sorry, I should have noticed that. Yeah. Okay. Are we all right then?
Yep.
Chip in again. Richard, as you know, this is twice this has happened now, which seems a bit strange.
Roger, just click on resume slideshow there, because we've only got the slides in the background, not the full version.
Oh, right. Yeah, okay.
Just with that orange box there, just below your mouse where it says resume slideshow. That's the one. Yeah, down a bit.
All right. Okay. Sorry about this. Right. So the next step, and who's it for? Well, this stream really is called sound foundations level. It wasn't my idea, but we had a problem because it's really for beekeepers in their early years. So why not beginner? Well, the problem is it's very difficult to describe what a beginner is. Is it somebody who hasn't started yet? Or is it somebody who's been keeping bees 2, 3, 5 years? And as I've been involved with beekeeping for a long time, I know that some people who only keep bees a year or so are actually very, very knowledgeable, very, very competent. And it's all good sound stuff. It's not just the fluffy stuff taken out of books. So we backed away from the beginner a bit. But of course, the beekeeper doesn't always know, because if they don't know what there is to know, they don't really know at what level they're at. And I can tell you on many occasions, I've seen what I consider perpetual beginners, really people been keeping bees 10, 15, 20 or more years, and they really haven't moved on for a long time. Some of the stories I can tell you, I really can write several books on my experiences of that. So this particular audience then is probably going to vary considerably, the people that are in it, because it might be their age or location, or perhaps they've got time they've got available for their bees, or their background, all sorts of things like that. They've had probably different sort of teaching and learning as well. And as I said in my earlier presentation this afternoon, teaching and learning really have got to go together. I see teaching as sort of pushing, so you're giving information to people. Learning is pulling, so you're dragging information from whoever's trying to teach you. And you can teach everybody exactly the same thing, but not everybody's going to learn the same amount. I'm very definitely not going to tell you that what you've already learned is wrong or what to do. I'm not that sort of chap. There's loads and loads of different ways of doing things. And really what the beekeeper's got to do is to find ways of keeping their bees that are that's efficient and it suits the bees. I'm going to give you a few ideas, but that's based on my experience. If it's any help to you, you're welcome to it. If it's not, then just discard it. What I don't like doing is undermining teachers. So if your teacher's told you one thing, I've told you another thing, you've got a little bit of a difficult situation. You can either take notice of me and perhaps move away from your teacher. It's up to you, but I don't see the point of undermining anybody. But you in this sort of position really need to progress. And probably in the first 2 or 3 years of keeping bees, that's really where most of your progress will be made. And quite honestly, you'll be told something and you'll find out that it doesn't really suit you, and you'll then go off and do something else, either what you worked at yourself or what somebody else has told you. I try to get beekeepers to do their thinking, not just do as they're told. And I am getting more and more people who just want an answer to a problem. They don't really want to know why they've got the problem in the first place, which I find a little bit strange. But I've got a much more inquisitive mind, perhaps, than some. But try to think things through yourself. And even if you go to somebody and say, look, I've got this problem, try to try to discuss with them what you think is the answer. And if they're a good, sound, honest person, they'll talk it through with you rather than just pow, 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 that's the answer, full stop, and off we go. I think as beekeepers, we need to understand what their needs are from their point of view, bees' point of view, not a human point of view. And I'm hoping that as beekeepers, you're enjoying the craft. Even after 56, nearly 57 years, I certainly have. And I keep telling people that beekeeping is fun. Sooner or later, somebody is actually going to believe me. So what do I hope to achieve then with this webinar? To help you move on to the next step. Now, that's entirely up to you at the rate you go. But you presumably had some sort of initial teaching, or perhaps if you haven't, you've just picked up a hive of bees, you picked up the kit and got to a certain level yourself. I always try to get people to move on so they know more. You don't have to know all the scientific stuff at all. You just really need to know enough to manage a colony efficiently and help the bees and keep them alive, which is quite important these days. You may have had some of the what I call the standard teaching, the fluffy stuff that, you know, it just taken straight out of books. If you have, then I think probably you will, if you've you'll probably want to move away on from that as soon as you can. I won't criticize anyone. Now, unfortunately, some beekeeping associations abandon your group. Once they've done the first year, that's it, you're on your own. And I fairly recently spoke to a lady who'd done her first year, and she then went and asked what's going to happen the next year. And she was fairly smartly told, well, that's it. If you want to know any more, go and look on YouTube or go and read a book. And sorry, but I don't think that sort of attitude is improving the overall standard of our beekeeping. As beekeepers, I think it's important to understand how bees live in an unmanaged situation. There's less and less of that happening because there are fewer people removing colonies from the wild situation. So the thing to do is to try and learn from those who have in your local area, not miles and miles away, thousands of miles away, because bees may well behave differently there. If you can understand that, you can also improve your management. So you're actually managing the bees better because you're doing it from their point of view, not yours. I hope I'm going to encourage increased knowledge. You probably won't get much from me in the hour or two that we're going to be here. But if I can encourage you just to go and think, I'll go and read up about that, please do so. I also want to try and encourage beekeepers to have their own management system. And a lot of beekeepers don't seem to understand it. They've all got it. The way they keep their bees is a system, and everybody's different, and everybody changes it if they introduce something new or delete something that they didn't work for a while. But in beekeeping, there's loads and loads of different ways of achieving the same thing. You can say that they're all right or they're all wrong. It depends very much on circumstances rather than just what somebody says. And I want to try and get beekeepers to actually manage their own bees competently. There are a lot of beekeepers who still have mentors. I came across one a few years ago. A couple had still got a mentor after after 10 years. And they wanted to know if they were far enough to go ahead on an introductory course. Right, from now on, I've got to assume there's no COVID restrictions, because it's going to be difficult to give a webinar based on something that may or may not last very long. Even the government don't seem to know how long the restrictions are going to last, but I don't get involved too much with news or newspapers, but it seems to me they're preparing us for several more months of lockdowns anyway. I think it's probably important that beekeepers know what the changes are in my time. This is not just to rattle on about the old times, because I think it's quite significant, some of the things that have happened, and the way that beekeeping is now to what it used to be. The craft itself is continually changing. It always has done, even, going from skeps to movable comb hives, all sorts of things like that. It's changing all the time. In my time, we've had also rape introduced, which was in the 1970s. Varroa came in 1992, got to me about 2 years later. Both of those are massive changes for me. Now, from your point of view, people who've come in later, that means that any older books, perhaps were written in the 40s, 50s, 60s, are still very, very sound on the beekeeping content, but of course they don't mention these two things. So you folk will have to just sort of make allowances. Don't discard the older books, because there's some very, very good books. At the moment, I'm scanning through about 300 old books, and some of them you go back 100 years, 120 years, and some of the beekeeping content, genuine beekeeping content, is absolutely brilliant. When I started in 1963, about half our members at Whisper Green worked on the land in some way. That meant there were practical people. They were probably stock people, or they could work things out. They didn't necessarily know the finer points of what was happening, but they could do it by visual clues. Now, a lot of those people had more colonies. Many of them had sort of 15 to 50 colonies. And the reason they had them was because they were on low wages. They probably worked on farms and had tied cottages, so they had plenty of space. And if they didn't have room in the garden, then there was always a field, corner of the field, or a bit of wasteland, or wood, or something like that. And what they were doing was they were selling honey at their garden gate to augment the income. Now, beekeepers in those days kept bees for, going back. I understand that the average number of colonies a beekeeper keeps now is only somewhere between 4 and 5. A little while ago, I think it was 4.2. Now, that really isn't very many if you take into account that some people have got several hundred colonies. So probably a lot of beekeepers are keeping 5 colonies or less. Whereas when I started, most of them were keeping 5 colonies or more. Beekeepers now keep colonies for less time. So, of course, the thing is, they had more, what one might term colony years than the modern beekeeper. So, no disrespect to the modern beekeeper, but the older beekeepers had a lot more chance. On top of that, they may well have taken over from the previous generations. So they had a start anyway. So it means that the modern beekeeper has got a standing start, and they've got less time and less opportunities to learn what the older beekeepers did. Now, that's not going back and saying, oh, the good old days and all the rest of it. Far from it. but the craft needs, I think, the craft in general, not individuals, the craft in general needs to recognise these issues and respond in some way, because the bees stay the same. All that's happened is the beekeepers have changed. Now, because the older beekeepers had more tricks up their sleeve, a lot of that has now gone. So the modern beekeeper tends to go on what the beekeeping manual says, or the book, or the YouTube presentation or whatever. And I think we're losing a lot of the old skills. I'm a great one for challenging what you've been told, unless of course I'm telling you, and then of course there's no need to. But of course that's been me being flippant yet again. Why is this? Well, we've had new discoveries, and if you take a simple thing like Varroa, it's always been thought that Varroa feed off hemolymph until about 3 or 4 years ago, I suppose. And there was a discovery that they don't actually feed on hemolymph, they feed on fat bodies. Now, expect somebody will come up and say that's wrong, but the point is that there's a lot of written information from the past that's telling everybody that Varroa feed on hemolymph. So it could be quite easy to think that is the case. So if somebody tells you that, you can now challenge it because because of the discoveries. I can tell you there's a huge amount of misinformation and poor inappropriate advice getting around. And the more you get into beekeeping, the more you realise that some of the things you've been told, hang on, my bees don't do that. And you can work things out from yourself. There's also quite a bit of false logic as well. And some of these things I'll be giving you examples as we go along. A lot of beekeepers humanise bees. They try to solve a bee colony problem from a human point of view. And of course, they're insects, boxes of insects. They're cold-blooded. We're mammals. We're warm-blooded. It's very, very different things. So you can't sort of solve a bee colony problem in a human way. What I just told you, we've now got a lot of inexperienced beekeepers. No disrespect to them, it's just how things have gone. A lot of the teachers that I see are quite inexperienced as well, and I do come across a lot of places where this year's beginners teach next year's beginners, which they do need help themselves. How they move on from that, I don't know. Some of the writers are quite inexperienced as well. You can tell that from what's in the magazine. Simply because they perhaps haven't had the experience at the bees themselves. So really what they're doing is just copying and pasting, and in some cases just rearranging the words and giving different meanings. We've now, of course, got internet forums, websites, YouTubes in the last perhaps 20 years or so. There is some good stuff on there, but of course it does need filtering. And how do you sort the wheat out from the chaff unless you actually know a little bit yourself? So from where you folk are, or where I think you folk are, the more you learn from the bees teaching you, I think the more you'll realise that some of the stuff that's coming out may not always be correct. So is what you're told always reliable? And when I say reliable, it may well be in one place, not another, because it depends on a lot of things, location and climate. So perhaps if something is happening in or is done in California, it may not suit Kentucky, It may not suit Connemara or the Welsh Hills or the North York Moors or the Somerset Levels. As I've already said, sometimes even 10 or 20 miles away is very different. It depends on the seasons because they vary a lot, perhaps the time of year, perhaps the type of bee, or perhaps if you've asked somebody a question and they told you something, it may be because you haven't given all the information on that particular colony. It could be the experience or knowledge of whoever's answering the question or is telling you something. Sadly, there's quite a bit of prejudice in beekeeping. I don't know why. Quite a lot of misinterpretation of things as well, and terminology seems to be changing. And I think I'm going to give you a couple of instances later. But one is the jumbo hive. Now, the jumbo hive, a lot of people now call the 14 by 12 a jumbo hive, but that isn't a jumbo hive. That's only been named that probably in the last 10 or 15 years. The real jumbo hive is an American hive, which is over 120 years old. Simple things like that. And so you folk, you've got to try and find all this out and understand it. I'm not being negative, because bees actually do things to suit themselves. We really must understand that when we're beekeeping, we're actually dealing with biology, and you can't sort of push bees around too much, because they will go and do whatever they think is relevant at the time. It must be sometimes difficult for the poor little things to actually understand what the beekeeper's trying to do, because sometimes even they don't. And I think I already mentioned that beekeepers don't always understand what the bees are trying to do. Just think of things from a bee's point of view. The poor old bees always get the blame, don't they? But I'm on their side, I can tell you that right now. So a bit of observation and lateral thinking then. When you get a little bit of experience, you'll learn what should be happening in a hive. You may already have done it. I don't know, because people pick these things up at a different sort of a pace. Try to observe what the bees are telling you, and a colony of bees is telling you something all the time, even if it's we're okay, we're doing well, we don't need you. It could be that hang on, we're running a bit short of food here, or it could be that we need another super. You know, all those sort of things, they're telling you something all the time. The trick is to be able to understand what they're trying to tell us. When you're looking at a hive, don't do what some people do and just simply gawk, mouth open, almost in amazement. Have a look at it, because even if you look at a little patch of a comb, is very often telling you things. You see all sorts of things. This last year, I photographed about half a dozen drones feeding out of cells. Now, the books tell us that they don't do that, but they do. I also photographed queens, fertile queens feeding out of cells as well, and the books say they don't do that, but they do, clearly. So try to interpret what the bees are telling you, because if you can pick that up, that will help you work with the bees to give them what they actually want. And as far as lateral thinking is concerned, have a look at your colony and you should be able to work out what may or may not happen in perhaps 1, 3, 7, 14 days time, or whatever. And it could be that you've got queen cells that are very close to emerging, and it could, being sealed, and it could be that you've got a swarm on the way. Little things like that. Well, that's actually quite a big thing. So here's just a hint of what happens in a natural nest. This is a pretty poor attempt at a section through a tree, but the blue bit is the cavity, the yellow bit is the comb, and the brown bit is the brood that's going up and down. The entrance is here. And in trees, they generally rot upwards from the entrance rather than down. Now, in a natural nest, the top is fixed. The brood moves vertically up and down. During the summer, when nectar and pollen are coming in, bees tend to put it as far away from the entrance as they can. So what happens is that when the brood in the top emerges, the bees fill it up with nectar and pollen. The queen lays underneath where all the empty comb is. She lays underneath, probably expanding the size of the nest, so that all that happens is the nest expands and then moves downwards. Getting to the end of the year, there's no more nectar coming in, so the brood nest contracts. As they eat the food, it moves up. So the brood is moving up and down all the time. Now that has several, that's relevant to several things. One of which is that in a natural nest, there's not the pressure on the cells that there is in a managed nest. Anyway, we tend to put the floor at the bottom. That is the fixed bit. We then put a barrier in, which could be either a crownboard or a queen excluder, which confines the queen there. So she can only stay in one area, the equivalent of one area. What do? We put the empty comb on the top rather than at the bottom, which is where the bees expect it. We then put a crownboard on the top, and that goes up and down depending on whether we put extra supers on or not. So basically, we got something upside down from a natural nest, and we expect the bees to do what we want. Anyway, we're stuck with it because bees are actually quite adaptable. But that's the sort of thing that beekeepers need to understand rather than, oh, just slap something on. Because if the bees do something that's not expected, it's no good saying, oh, bees never read the book and all this old nonsense. They're just trying to respond as best as they can to what gets thrown at them. Siting hives. I expect you've all heard you've got to put them in full sun and they've got to be facing southeast. Well, is that best for the bees? When I had 130 colonies, I kept them in really light woodland, so sort of dappled shade, in a square facing all different directions. And I can tell you that those bees did really well. And those facing whatever direction really didn't matter at all. It really doesn't matter. So what I'm going to suggest you do is that if you've got your bees in full sun, doesn't matter which way they face, I suggest you move them, place them in shade, especially nukes, because I think it will reduce swarming. And I'm pretty certain it will reduce stress as well. On many occasions, I've seen Excuse me. On many occasions in a full colony with 2, 3 or more supers on, bees all up the front of the hive. And I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to shield it from the sun. Because don't forget, you've only got a plank of wood, 3/4 or 20 millimeters or so thick. If you get the sun beating down on it, you basically got a radiator inside, and the poor bees just cannot ventilate. So they come outside, and I believe what they're doing is just trying to shield the outside from the sun. If you're in the shade, I think it would be a lot easier for you to work. You won't get so sweaty, and it'll be much more pleasant to work. Going back, place them in the shade, especially nukes, because they are more vulnerable than a full colony. And this, of course, is what happens, and this is one of them. And this, I'm afraid, is one of mine. Why is it one of mine? Because where I put it, a tree got blown down, and I didn't move the nuke. I just left it, and the sun came in, and that's what happened. They came out, and I think what they're doing there is just shielding the sunny side, so that so it don't get hot. Those bees have got to be stressed, and they're not doing what they should be doing. How many of you can put your hand up here if you like, have been told to leave two queen cells when you leave queen cells? Why? It's insurance in case one is dud. But the people that tell you that don't actually tell you what happens, because if you leave two queen cells and the colony is in the right condition, that is, it's large colony, the weather is good, what will happen is most times, and if I say 80% of the time, I don't think I'm going to be too far out, what they will do is swarm on the first one to emerge, irrespective of what kind of queen cell they are. Doesn't matter. Swarm on the first to emerge, or if you've ever noticed, it takes several days, probably between 5 and 7, for a colony to detect a queen cell is dead, because that's how long it usually takes them to start chewing a queen cell down. So what happens is the colony still swarms on the first, on the one to emerge, and leaves the dead one behind. So you're not getting over what you were trying to get over in the first place. What happens then is you turn somebody else into a beekeeper, whether they like it or not, by filling their chimney up with bees, and they could be yours. So I suggest very strongly, if you leave queen cells, if it's a small colony, small nuke, you will be fine. You can leave 20 if you want to, and they won't be a problem. But if you leave anything that is likely to swarm, and that could even be a nuke, a strong nuke is burst in the box. That if you they will quite easily swarm. We're often told that we must leave queen cells that are heavily dimpled. So that one's heavily dimpled. Is it good? Well, I thought so. And it didn't emerge, so I cut it open, a dead queen inside. Got to the point where it hadn't even inflated its wings, so that was probably a day off emerging, but it had died. Now that I can't remember the circumstances in that case, but that could probably have stayed there several days before the bees realised that it was dud. So getting on to the dimples now, bearing in mind what we're told, that any smooth ones you get rid of, and just use the dimple ones. So which one would you use? You'd probably go for the left-hand one. But you know, I've got something up my sleeve, don't you? The difference between the left-hand one and the right-hand one is purely age, because the bees seem to work on them for several days, put the dimpling on. So the younger ones are actually smooth. It's the older ones that are dimpled. Now, sometimes you can get older ones that are smooth and they're darker. Then yes, okay, fine. But as a beekeeper, you haven't got to see too many of those, and you'll recognize them. I keep hearing more and more that bees will only swarm on swarm cells. They will not swarm on supersedure or emergency cells. Well, if anyone's been keeping bees any length of time, they will probably tell you that that's not the case, because they will and they can. With any kind of queen cell, if the colony's in the right condition and the weather's good, all sorts of things like that, whatever the number of cells you put up or the type, there's probably at least an 80% chance of them swarming. But in any case, you don't have to believe me. Just try it and see what happens. And I suggest that you better get a ladder out quickly, and all your kit, because in my experience, bees will actually swarm on all types of queen cells, whatever they are, if the colony's in the right condition. Might be a different group of people, I don't know, but they love to tell us where queen cells are going to be on the frame, and that's how you can tell which sort of queen cell they are. Swarm always on the bottom. Some people will say around the sides, but always on the bottom. Supersedure always on the face. And I'm sure everybody who's listening has probably heard this from somewhere. They often are, but it's pretty unreliable. And I've even had people tell me that they've got both swarm cells and supersedure cells on the same frame. Well, it's pretty unlikely, but they based it on where they're told that they should be. They can be anywhere, and frequently are. So how can you tell what sort of queen cell you've got then? Well, this is actually on Dave Cussman's website, so I'll do just a short bit here. With swarm cells, it's going to be more than 4, usually probably more than 6, but let's say more than 4, could be 30 plus, usually probably between 10 and 20, something like that. They can be built anywhere on the comb. If there's a few gaps or something like that, very, very often on the edges of gaps or holes. Now, the thing about swarm cells is they're usually staggered in age. The least staggering I've ever known is about 2 days, but usually it's between perhaps 5, 6, 7, 8 days, something like that. Now, they're going to be queen cells right from the start, so they're going to come from cups, so you can tell what they're likely to be. Supersedure cells, individually, they will look the same as swarm cells, but now we get the changes. This is my wording, nobody else's. Usually 1, often 2, occasionally 3. And what I mean by that is it's very, very rare you'll get more than 3 supersedure cells, and you're more likely to get 1 than you are 3. So perhaps 1 or 2. Now, the key is they're similar age and usually fairly close together. You won't get one on frame 3 and the other one on frame 7. They'll be close together. Naturally, supersedure cells come in the the end of the summer. In my area in West Sussex, last 2 weeks in July, right through to September, probably in the cooler areas further north, bring forward a week or two. I've got often in the summer because, as you probably know, you very often get supersedure of queens in the summer now, very often with very young queens too. But that's outside this talk. If you want to know anything about that, again, check on Cushman's website because it is quite significant. So those are the two what I call natural cells. Then you can get emergency cells, which are built by the colony if the queen goes missing. These are converted from worker larvae, and they are built from the midrib of the comb, which could be on the face of the comb, or it could be right on the edge too. Now, bees prefer newer comb and the edge if they possibly can. So that's probably a much more reliable way of telling what the cells are, rather than the blanket supersedure on the face, swarm on the bottom. So have a look, see what's happening in the colony, and you should be able to find out. Now, here's some swarm cells. They've got to be swarm cells because there's 5 of them, and they're all on the face of the comb. Look. Here are some more. There are 4 there. Now, that's rather a poor comb, but if you notice, 3 of them are on the edge of a bit of comb. And these, of course, are the cups that the bees didn't use. Now, these are supersedure cells. They're both the same age. You can tell that because the tips have been thinned. They're not on the face of the comb. They're right on the bottom, and they're close together. I know they were supersedure cells. This is one right on the edge of the comb, and it was in one of my colonies, and it was the only one there. I missed it, and the colony actually swarmed on that queen cell. So, well, what happened was it was a clipped queen, and the swarm came out. So that's how I knew it. Crownboard slots in the summer, I come across 2 things that I see as problems that I'd advise against doing. One is people putting porter bee escapes into the crownboard when it's on the hive. What happens is, of course, the bees propolis up the gap, and then you come to use the porter bee escape and it's full of propolis. So I suggest very strongly that you don't do that. Another one is that beekeepers leave the slots open, I think in the mistaken belief that you're opening up, the top for ventilation. But what happens is very often the gap in the roof gets filled with comb. And there's one just starting. Now, this one's actually quite interesting because it's a bit of a rarity. There's 3 slots in this board. And have a look there. The bees haven't built any comb. And have a look here. Bees haven't built any comb either. But that there they started, and they've actually started filling it with nectar. The reason is, of course, that the bees do what are called a chimney. They go straight up to the middle of the combs first. Now, if that roof was on, if there was a nectar flow on, bees could fill that roof cavity in a couple of days and fill it. And here's the start of it. And I can tell you, if you get a nectar flow on, bees could probably have built that within 2 days. And they will fill it up well within a week if in a nectar flow. They put propolis around it, as indeed they started to do. Look, and then of course you can't get the roof off, and you've got a dreadful mess. Just close up the entrances, close up the holes in the crownboard, and don't put the hive in the full sun, and you haven't got a problem. There is a view that if you put foundation in the middle of the brood nest, it expands the brood area. That's, I think, false logic. And you've got to start thinking what bees actually do. They only draw comb if they've got income with which to produce the wax to build the comb. If there's no flow on or nothing coming in, they just simply don't draw the comb. They will not take honey or nectar out of the combs to produce wax. They just don't do it. So what happens is, if you get a week or so's poor weather or a nectar dearth, so you can still have good weather but a nectar dearth, nothing gets built. So you end up with the queen bee on one side of the sheet of foundation. You've basically got a division board there, and the other side, you can sometimes have almost two colonies of bees. It cramps the queen down into one half, and although I haven't seen it regularly, I have seen on occasions emergency cells built the other side of the foundation, simply because the queen hasn't got across there and she can't put her footprint pheromone on the combs. Now, in a nectar flow, you can get something different happen. If it's a massive flow, they may actually build it out and fill it with nectar, which they can build and fill a comb in a day, and another couple of days, and they can actually seal it. I have seen that on occasions. So if you can put drawn comb in, so much the better, because what usually happens, not always, usually happens, is the queen will lay it up fairly quickly. So of course the bees can't put the nectar in, but that doesn't always happen, because if you haven't got enough supers on, the bees will put the nectar in the drawn comb. So where do I get my drawn comb from? It's well known that I get my brood combs drawn out above the queen excluder in brood boxes that I use as supers. So this is what can happen. This is one that happened to me. The gaps along the bottom, because I make my own foundation, not that I use proper, commercial foundation. So that's what can happen. In a couple of days, look, they've even started to seal it. So it becomes a barrier for the queen, and she may not lay beyond it. You may need to move it if that happens. So just move it out and move other brood combs in back to where you are. The standard teaching that I've mentioned earlier, here's an example of it. And I expect you've all heard that a single brood box, British standard brood box, is too small. There's not enough room for the queen to lay. You can't get enough food in it for winter. Therefore, you need a bigger hive with perhaps bigger frames, or double brood box, or brood and a half, or whatever. This is blandly trotted out by a lot of people. Well, I've been using a single brood chamber national for over 50 years. It suits me, probably more colonies than anybody else. What am I doing right or wrong or differently? Well, again, we're back to different kinds of bees, different kinds of methods of beekeeping. It's really relative to the type of bees you've got, because if you've got a prolific queen that lays a lot of eggs, yeah, of course, a single brood chamber isn't big enough. I use non-prolific queens, and I get away with absolutely no trouble at all. I don't usually have to feed in the spring, so it really is no problem. It's simply the type of bees you got. But now we're on that. There's no good putting a prolific queen in a single brood chamber like that, because you'll end up with problems. But on the other hand, if you've got a double brood chamber or a bigger hive, it's no good putting a non-prolific queen in, because you just rattle around inside. It's bees for boxes, really, all the other way around. Now, bees aren't all the same, despite what a lot of beekeepers think. Why is that? Well, we got natural reasons. Worldwide, there are around about 28 subspecies. And the reason they're subspecies is because they've all evolved to suit whatever environment they found themselves in. And in doing so, they develop their own characteristics too, such as I've hinted that some are much more prolific than others. Some winter better, some are early starters in the year. There's all sorts of different reasons. Then, of course, there's natural variation throughout their range, and that's to suit different sort of microclimates and that sort of thing. And these are called ecotypes. Now, I know there are some people who don't accept the concept of ecotypes, but I think these days most people, certainly most scientists, seem to as well. Having got that far, we then get human intervention involved. And stock movement is a massive problem for almost anything, because it creates lots and lots of problems. Anyway, stock has been moved around the world, which then, of course, creates firstly hybridization, and secondly mongrelization, which is why we've got such a mishmash in this country, because we keep getting imports coming in, which won't let our bees settle down into a standard type. So I will speak a little bit about prolific bees, because bees and queens are sold as being prolific, as if it's a great sort of virtue, it's wonderful, something that you must have. But it's really relative to the number of eggs that a queen lays. The more she lays, the more prolific she is. The less she lays, the less prolific. So it's really the queen that's prolific, not the colony. And of course, that creates more brood. Brood is incredibly hungry. And as a beekeeper, you can observe this quite easily, because if a colony has got a brood break during the summer, so there's no larva to feed, if you've got a nectar flow on, that colony will bring in a lot more honey than, or nectar rather, than the others will. And the reasons for that are that you haven't got the brood to that's a burden on the food, and the bees that are nurse bees, they get shunted forward in their tasks, and they become foragers quicker. Now, as I said in the earlier session at 4 o'clock, just because you've got more bees in a hive doesn't often mean more honey. It will where they evolved in Southern Europe, that's fine because the weather suits them. But the weather doesn't always suit here what we've got. So poor weather, you've got more adults to feed, more brood, and you end up, of course, with less food. I'm going to touch on imports, because people in your position may well decide to buy second or third colonies or whatever. And of course, imports are a possibility, but they're mainly going to be covered in the other webinars. But very, very, very briefly, basically, they are usually prolific. The queens are usually prolific simply because of where they come from. Most of the imports into this country come from Southern Europe, and even buckfast, although there's no definition of the type, most of them I see these days, never used to be, most of them I see these days tend to be sort of Italian. It's very, very yellow, which are quite prolific. They have got possible problems. Obviously, importing pesticides and pathogens we haven't got. Small hive beetle and Tropilelaps being two. They have been considered so serious for a long time that they were made notifiable in 2006. We still haven't got them. They may be less suited to the environment because, of course, that's where they came from, different sort of areas. And what a lot of people don't realise is that very often they're either pure or first crosses. And there's a thing in beekeeping called F2 aggression. And if it from a pure race, it's not the daughter from the queen, it tends to be the granddaughter. Not all the time. It, as I'm told, it's about 1 in 4 chance. And because of the prolificness, they need the extra food. And I know that imported type bees don't live long in the wild because I've removed ever so many wild colonies from places and, you know, out of trees and buildings and that sort of thing. And they are very, very rarely are they, have they got the visual or behavioural characteristics of a native. So I suggest quite strongly that if you are looking at acquiring bees to increase, get them locally, get locally adapted stock, and I think you'll find they're going to be better bees. So make an increase, then going on to that, I suggest that beekeepers always have 2 or more colonies. I used to say 2, but because winter losses and are higher now, if you can have 3, so much the better, because then if one dies or it needs help, you've got the other one that could help it out. And that's absolute boon. Whatever you do, don't overdo it, because there is such a thing as bee fever. And I've seen ever so many go down that route. And, you know, sometimes people in the 2nd or 3rd year have got 30 colonies and they just simply don't know how to manage them. And they find that everything gets on top of them and they just basically abandon them. For making increase, there's going to be information on other webinars. There's a whole stack of stuff on Dave Cushman's website. But if you do make increase and you make up a nucleus, I suggest that you make sure the frames are well covered with bees, so you've got a strong nucleus. And if you need a queen or queen cell, get them locally. There's plenty of beekeepers, usually with good local stock. And at the sort of your fairly early stage, I suggest that you move them away about 3 miles, because if with a small number of colonies, you leave them in your own apiary, the flying bees could go home and leave your nuke very weak. And that's one of the main problems I see with beginners making up nukes. They are far too weak. Okay, you might read about various tricks of making sure there are young bees in the nukes. They don't always work, and I've seen some spectacular failures. Now, if you are in an area where you've got BDI, as bee diseases insurance, which really is only England and Wales, and then not every association, make sure you've got enough cover, because the standard cover covers you for 3 colonies. If you go over that and you're not insured, you end up with foul brood. You aren't covered. You won't be covered because you're considered to be underinsured. But there's no point getting too involved in that. Just check it out on the BDI website, or indeed your local association. Tip or 2. There are an awful lot of entrance blocks that have got lost. They probably end up on the ground and end up getting rotted or whatever, or end up been an entrance block in the wrong floor, so it's the wrong size or whatever. Keep them together. Put it on a lead. Just a simple thing. Here I've got a bit of baler twine and a few staples, but a little chain or something like that. Just a simple thing to make it easy for yourself. Have you ever wondered why bees build comb underneath the bottom bars of frames? Well, if they do, it's because the gap underneath the frame is big, because you get two depths of floors. You get what are called the shallow floors, where the distance between the bottom of the frame and the floor is probably about 10 millimeters, something like that, or the deep floor, which is 20 or 25. Now, with the shallow floor, bees can come in the entrance and climb straight up on the bottom of the combs. They can't do that if the gap's bigger. So, of course, what do? They build a bit of comb in there so they can just climb up on it. What would you do? Exactly the same. So that's why it is a bit of a nuisance. Most people consider it a nuisance because they've got to cut it off or whatever. But worse still, bees can quite easily and commonly do put queen cells underneath, which the beekeeper may miss. Now, going back just a little bit, look at these queen cells here. They all look pretty good to me. They're not quite sealed, but they're all smooth. See, so it's just the age of them. Right, that's that. This one here is a bit older. There's a queen cell there in the comb underneath the frame. That could easily be missed. But look, it's dimpled. So it's several days older than the others were. By contrast, this is a frame on a shallow floor. Absolutely nothing under there. That's one of mine. Absolutely nothing under there at all. So if you do want to, don't want that comb underneath, then go on to shallow floors. Now, whilst we're on this comb here, there's quite a lot you can learn about it. This on the left-hand side is where the entrance is. There's two reasons I can tell that. One is the food is as far away as they can get it from the entrance, the other side of the brood. That's one thing. And the other thing is very often bees would chew down the front of the comb by the entrance, which they don't always do at the back. So this then is the entrance down here. Books and some teachers will always tell you that bees will only put pollen above the brood. Here it is at the side and underneath, look. So that's that myth busted. But also look at this brood here. Now, this area here and up through here all looks good, fine, no problem. But this is danger. You have got drones there laid in worker cells. I don't know what there is, probably a dozen, might even be 15 there. We know they're drones because drones normally get built in a cluster. These are just single. I'm fairly certain that that queen within about 6 weeks would fail. Within about 6 weeks would fail. But that's based on me having 20 years of the queen problems that I've been talking about. So check it out. Don't think, oh yeah, there's a few drones there. That shouldn't happen. And finally, going down here on the right-hand side, this white here is granulated honey. That probably, it could be also right, but my guess is it overwintered. And you can see there's a line here below where it's dark. I think you'll find all that area there is granulated honey, and this lot here is liquid. So you can tell a lot by just looking at a comb. Reading the comb, reading the bees. Feeding. The old measures used to be 2 pounds of sugar to a pint of water. In modern measures, it's 4 kilos to 2.5 litres, which is basically exactly the same. Now, autumn feeding, I think you'll do bees a lot more good if you just feed them fairly gently. I know you can buy these great big feeders and feed them down in one hit, but if you feed gently, 2 things happen. One is you bring the queen perhaps back into lay. She lays in the brood area, and because if you feed gently, like sort of pint every night or a couple of pints every other night, that sort of thing, she somehow seems to think there's a nectar flow on, so she'll lay eggs at a reasonable rate and keep them going. Whereas if you fed down in one go, the bees would just fill the cells, and she wouldn't be able to lay eggs. That's just at a time when you need young bees going into the winter. So it's stopping the queen from laying. The other thing is, and beekeepers don't seem to understand this, once you start feeding bees, it diverts the foragers to go out and collect pollen. So they bring pollen back, put it in the cells, turn it into bee bread, and then put a light covering of syrup over the top. So the bees have got pollen for the winter. Whereas if you just feed down in one go or very quickly, the bees haven't got time to do it, especially if you've got a few days bad weather. So it allows bees to collect pollen. If you're in an ivy area, that honey granulates, and they can actually bring in quite a lot in the autumn. You can smell it, so you know the bees are bringing it in, but also it can granulate before the bees seal the cells. If that is the case, feed gently with syrup at the same time. And the reason that I do that is that although bees won't put different sorts of food in the same cell, they will mix the cells up so that the bees have got a mixture of granulated and liquid food, so they can, during the winter, in a hard winter, they can navigate their way through it, and they shouldn't starve. A lot of beekeepers do emergency feeding in the spring. My emergency feeding should be done in the autumn. If you don't feed them enough, it's either your fault for not giving them enough, or you've got the wrong bees that have eaten too much during the winter. And then only feed if the bees need it. I know there's a great view these days that feed, and if you're unsure, feed again. Well, you can overfeed bees in spring, which can bring forward a swarming. And then, of course, check in the winter to make sure that your colony has still got quite a bit of food. Okay. This is what's called isolation starvation, and it's caused by ivy honey. You can see here that the bees have started producing brood, quite a big patch. Dead bees there. The reason we got dead bees there is because this area here, that area there is, as you can see, granulated honey, probably ivy. And because this is darkish, look, you can see the difference in color between that and that, which is, I think, liquid. The bees will not go over an area like this to get to the liquid when they're in cluster. So, of course, they died with plenty of food on. And that is a close-up of the comb, and that's what you get. The bees just cannot cannot liquefy it fast enough. Getting to close now. I mentioned a few useful organisations that you may or may not have come across. The National Honey Show, which I know it's held in Surrey these days, but it is a national event. It was virtual last year, and what will happen this year, I don't know, but let's assume it is going to be a sort of face-to-face one. National Honey Show is not just about showing honey. There's loads of lectures going on. Every day there's lectures. Some days there's two streams of lectures. Most of them are videoed, and there's a whole load of really good sound past videos on the National Honey Show website. Just have a look. Loads of good stuff on there. There's workshops as well, all sorts of things from sort of skep making to cosmetics, all sorts of little bits that you can get involved with yourself, and a load of trade stands. Virtually all the major suppliers are there. So it's in October each year, and that's a really good time to go and get anything extra that you need for the following year. Then there's a Central Association of Beekeepers that, although it's been going for a very long time, not many people know of. But the motto is bringing science to the beekeeper, and it's really beekeepers who are interested in science, and there's a lot of interesting stuff there that you might want to access. Have a look at the website. And of course, the Bee Improvement and Bee Breeders Association, which we are part of, hosting this webinar, really trying to improve bees, not just for bees, but for beekeepers as well in our area. Trying to encourage people to raise queens to avoid using imports. And of course, beekeeping education, which, as Richard mentioned, was what the webinars are all about. Going to close now, a few simple things to remember. Some of them that you may not find in books. A frame of brood, when it emerges, you end up with 3 frames of bees. And the relevance of that, of course, is that if perhaps you've got 5 frames in a nuke box and you've got 2 of the frames a sealed brood, in a week or 10 days, you've got bees pouring out the front because there's going to be a lot of them in there. So this is all part about observation, natural thinking, seeing what's going to happen when the brood emerges. If you remove a queen, and there's brood there, young brood, emergency cells will always get built. And I do struggle sometimes to get people to understand that, but that is almost 100%. I mentioned that we're dealing with biology. I keep mentioning it because people don't seem to realize that, but biology itself is very, very variable. Individually, wasps are very much tougher than bees. Not only are they tougher, they work at lower temperatures and that sort of thing. So when you get the time of year when the wasps are around, reduce the entrances of whatever you've got, whether it's a nuke box or a full hive. Make sure the bees are strong enough to defend it. And you may have to do it in a nectar dearth as well. So if even sometime in the summer, even May, June, early July, if the bees aren't bringing in any nectar, it soon diverts them into trying to find some food from somewhere else. So close your entrances down. Try to work with your colonies, not the calendar. So just because somebody in an article says, oh, the second week in April do so and so, look and see what the state of the colony is rather than just working on their calendar. One thing you can do if you get a spell of wet weather is just take the roof off, turn it upside down, and see if there's any damp inside. If there is, it's probably come in where the corners are folded on the sheet on the top. That's okay. You can deal with that. Just take a little bit of propolis, warm it in your hand, and stuff it into the crack. So it doesn't cost you anything, and you should solve the problem. If you take a roof off a hive, have a look, see what's in there. Spiders don't like damp, and woodlice do. So if you've got spiders in there, it's dry. If you've got woodlice, it's damp. Now, if you've got spiders and woodlice, you've got to use your gumption. And please, please, please check for foul brood at every inspection. So when you get a comb like this, and I keep bringing this comb up, and I keep trying to encourage people to do it. Every time I go to a colony, as soon as I get a frame with brood in all stages like that, just have a look at the sealed brood for signs of AFB, unsealed brood for EFB. If the first comb's okay, you can assume the rest are. I do it at every inspection myself, and I encourage other people to do, and it's a habit. Sorry, folks, that's the second time we've shown that today. Now for the people who wanted to know about touchwood for smoker, that's touchwood, and basically every woodland has got it. You can break it up, and then of course you can use it in your smoker like that. Really good, I find, for smokers. So I think that's it, folks. So there it is. Nell and Rosie think beekeeping is fun too, and they'd like to help me answer your questions. So thank you all very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Roger. We've had a few questions come through.
Is that all?
Yeah, just.
I want to answer more than that number.
Give you a good one to start off with. What are your honest views on treatment-free beekeeping?
Right, next question, please. No, I'm happy to say, but this might take some time. When Varroa first came out, I remember being at a committee meeting of the West Sussex Beekeepers Association, and there was a very bossy lady there who insisted that everybody should treat their bees the same day every year, and that will get rid of Varroa. So I said, well, I'm not so sure about treatment, and this was right in the early days. I said, I'm not very sure about this treatment. I said, how are they going to build up resistance to it? And you know, I sort of got shot down. The more I've come, the more I've, and then of course I did same as everybody else, Baverol, Apistan, Apigard, all sorts of things like that. And all along, I thought to myself, this is daft. You know, we're treating. How on earth are the bees going to develop sort of resistance, resilience, call it what you like? And I've met a lot of good, sound beekeepers who are observant, and they're trying to observe what's happening in unmanaged colonies. And the scientists are actually doing the same as well. And I now have the belief that we ought to at least try and reduce treatments. And I'll be absolutely honest, for the last 2 years that I was for Green teaching apiary, I haven't treated our bees. This year, on the 12th of December, 20 colonies, all 20 colonies were flying absolutely fine, no trouble at all. On the 30th of December, half of them were dead. And I'm saying that in front of people. Now, in 18 days, I'd lost 10 colonies. Go inside the colonies, virtually no bees there. There's still plenty of food, no bees on the floor. And a clue is that one of the colonies got a lighting board, and there were a lot of bees dead on the lighting board. I think they'd all absconded. Right, now, it's easy to say, oh, Roger Patterson, no, he's lost half his bees. I have treated those exactly the same as I have my own at home. I've got 26 at home, and I haven't lost one yet. Exactly the same bees. And in the same apiary, I'll put 28 nukes into winter. And on the 30th of December, I haven't been since, the 30th of December, I'd lost 2, which I expected to, because, you know, we tend to bring nukes through to say queens. They were the weaker ones. So I expected to lose them. If you go treatment free, I think you've got, certainly in the early stages, I think you've got to accept heavy losses. And with my experience, they come very, very quickly. You cannot do it. You cannot recover them. So I'm even though in the teaching apiary I've lost half the colonies, I am still committed to try and do something, because I think those 10 that are left, if in fact they're still alive, they are probably the ones to breed from. So I'm very much on the side of treatment free, but I think you can't just do it without trying to find out what's happening at the same time.
Okay, super. Next question then. Why do bees, if they have evolution, have they not evolved not to bring ivy honey back if it's causing them to starve? And linked to that, what do you do with granulated honey in the combs?
Right. In a natural state, I don't think it's a problem, because they work their way downwards with the honey they're putting in. Ivy is right at the end. That usually comes in September-ish. But of course, that's also the first to get used. So I think they've eaten through it before it becomes a problem. It's only really a problem in really cold weather, because of course, what's happening is the colder the weather, the more the bees cluster. Next week, I'm going to have 10 or 11 degrees where I am. At the moment, it's freezing all day. At the moment, bees are clustering really tight. Next week, they'll break cluster, and if they fly, they'll go out and defecate. And probably what they'll do is either move on to different stores, different combs, or they'll forage within the hive and bring food back to where they are. I lost a little bit of track of what I was going to say there. Anyway, in a natural situation, they have eaten through it. Oh yeah, it's only a problem in the cold weather. Yeah.
And the second part of that was, what do you do with combs that have got crystallized honey in there?
If you put them in if you can catch it in the autumn and everything is crystallized, then either move them to the outside or put them in your shed. The bees will actually clear them out in the spring and summer, because of course what the problem is, they can't get water to liquefy it. I'm not a technical person at all, but as I understand it, when granulation takes place, the water in the crystal gets forced out of the crystal into the gaps between the crystals. So what the bees do is they just lick the water and perhaps a very thin ivy honey out, and then they drop the crystals on the floor. So of course that lot gets wasted. I think probably if you can catch it early enough, and this ivy granulates so fast that sometimes it's granulated before it's sealed. On many occasions I've seen that happen. Perhaps get it out, replace it with empty comb, and then feed them syrup, and then feed them the granulated combs in the summer. Probably not best on a colony with the supers on, because they might just move it straight up.
Super. What are your thoughts on bottom entrance floors?
What do you mean bottom entrance floor? Sorry.
Well, I presume what they mean is that the bees have to go through and up into the hive.
Ah, right. Yeah, okay.
Heather floor, is it called?
This is an old idea. There was a Scottish floor called the Williamson Heather floor, which you cannot find any reference to now. But the Scottish beekeepers used it when they took the bees to the heather moors, and the bees came up halfway through the floor, and I think they reckoned that it didn't get drafts inside. I've actually got one, the only one that I know, certainly in the south of England. I haven't got a problem with it. I actually quite like it, but there's a modern idea on that, which is a plastic invention, which was invented in New Zealand. I forget the name of it. Hive something. Anyway, Thorns are selling them. Yeah, I don't want a bit of advertising. It's just a plastic piece that you nail on the bottom of the floor, and the bees walk in through like a little tunnel and then come up inside. I think that's actually a good idea. But of course, it won't be too long before somebody else pinches that idea, and you can pick them up for about 28 pence instead of 11 quid or whatever they are.
Excellent.
You can make them easy, you know. I think they're probably a good idea because I think it might reduce robbing considerably.
Next question is, when you were talking about natural cavities in trees,
yeah,
why do we not just start putting empty supers at the bottom of the hive then, and just move so that the bees can work themselves down into the honey supers?
Bees always have food above them or to the back of the hive, and during the winter they always move upwards. So if you did that during the winter, they'd starve with a load of food underneath them.
I think what he was meaning was, when we're running the colonies in the summer, why not have the brood on top and just put the supers underneath?
Yeah, because bees always put food above. They very rarely put it underneath, only in emergency situations.
Yeah.
This is one of the reasons why I don't think this idea of so-called, well, they call it undersupering, but it's not undersupering, of putting a super of food underneath the brood chamber for the winter. You know, I think the bees are going to go up because they expect to. They always do. They always eat upwards. And I think they'll leave the food behind.
Solid or open mesh floors?
Open mesh floors in this country have only come in since Varroa. In the States, they've been using them for years and years and years, 100 years. They call them screen bottom boards. I actually quite like them, but I don't think they have the benefits that were claimed for them. I've now got a mixture. Well, I went over totally to open mesh floors, but I retained the solid floors, and I've now got about 50-50. I really don't think it makes any difference to the level of varroa. What it does make a difference to is the ventilation of the hive, certainly during the summer, because I mentioned bees up the front of the hive. If you've got solid floors, that will happen much more than if you've got open mesh floors. In fact, during the summer, if you have a look on a very hot day, very often you'll see bees underneath the mesh, and they're fanning. And what they're doing is getting the circulation going. They're clever little things, you know.
Certainly are. Have you got time for a queen rearing one?
Yeah, but it's don't forget it would have to be sort of fairly basic. Yeah, carry on.
Would you recommend using a 6-frame nuke as a starter finisher, or would you recommend using a full colony?
I've used a 6-frame or 5-frame nuke. If it's really bursting with bees, you can get queen cells raised quite happily. And I reckon, it's only a personal thing, I reckon 1 cell per frame. So if you've got a 5-frame nuke, absolutely bursting with bees, don't try to get it to make any more than 4, 5, 6 queen cells. In fact, one thing you can do, which I've done for years and years and years, is if you get a really strong nuke, if you've got a queen in a colony that's perhaps swarmed, and she's a good queen and you don't want to get rid of her, you can use those queen cells. But if you put her in a very strong nuke, within 2 or 3 weeks, they will put up swarm cells as well. So you get another little flush of swarm cells a couple of 3 weeks later.